Get 5 coffins ready.
Hey everyone, welcome to my guide for Vulcan. Vulcan is a hyper-aggressive spammy burst mage who excels at outputting a non-stop barrage of burst damage, capped off with the hardest hitting burst ultimate in the game. Vulcan doesn't have incredibly hard to land abilities like Ra, but has stubbier range than most mages, so he requires a smooth and decisive playstyle to pull off. Build-wise, Vulcan goes all out in the damage. He's a lot like Zeus where it's like, sure, you can go a breastplate or a mantle and maybe survive, but the chances are you won't be able to stop himself from dying, so you'd have a better time just having more damage to try and output more damage than your adversaries. Relics-wise, we're definitely on the Beads and Ages train here, especially since Vulcan has no built-in CC immunity. He's also definitely a god where Shell is in the cards, upgraded to Phantom Shell against wall-heavy gods like Ymir, Kraken, and Odin. He's in big trouble if he gets snagged by those walls. Shard-wise, as a spam-based mage, Horn Shard suits him very well, although teaming Claw Shard with his main burst combo isn't exactly bad either. Recipe-wise, Bountiful Bow is a good go-to, but I prefer Party Punch for the burst, especially when you consider how it teams with Vulcan's passive. Upon hitting an enemy god with an ability, Vulcan activates his passive, which grants him movement speed, an MP5, or mana per 5 seconds, the base mana regen in SMITE. This is literally perfect for a spam mage like Vulcan, movement speed to get himself in range, to hit his abilities, and or have a better chance of not getting punished for going for poke, and also some mana regen on top to keep the spam going. One ability that benefits the most from this passive is Vulcan's first ability. Vulcan winds up quickly and then deals damage in a thin line in front of himself with medium range, and then dashes backwards a short distance. And that's why it's good with the passive. Stubby range, helped by the movement speed. A low cooldown, helped by the mana regen to keep the spam up. But also of note, Vulcan is immune to cripples with this ability, meaning he can still dash backwards even when he's crippled. This is one of the biggest reasons for his prominence last year, since gods like Nox, Maui, Ares, and even Cupid a little bit were very prevalent, who have very powerful cripples. So it meant you could have a god who is essentially immune to one of the best parts of their kits, or at least one part of it. It's hardly an on her leap or a Cernanos dash though. One dash backwards is almost never enough to get him out of trouble. Which is why it's immune to cripples and has such a low cooldown, because either way you use it, either as an escape tool or as a piece of your combos, it's still a risk. But at the very least, the damage is near instantaneous, but it doesn't quite feel like it thanks to that small wind-up time. So if you've been watching these guides for a while, you can guess what's coming next. This is an ability where you want to use quick casting to give it, well, quick casting, but still give yourself the targeter to give yourself an idea of how you want to space yourself. Because it goes without saying, use this ability at max range or don't use it at all. Even then, the movement speed from your passive is still very useful for getting in range to use this ability and scaring away once it's finished, so you want to make the most out of it. Luckily, Vulcan has ways to set up for this ability as well as protect himself while he uses it, one such ability being Vulcan's second ability. Vulcan summons a turret, and this turret will fire at the nearest enemy target within range of their radius. And it will ignore 25% of the target's magical protections with each shot. This turret has a set amount of health, and you can place it in front of yourself to tank things such as towers. However, the turret takes double damage from any source other than an enemy god, so in short, it will die quicker to towers and minions than it will to enemy gods. Despite this being a deployable, hitting enemy gods with the turret will still activate Vulcan's passive. The radius is pretty clear, but the range is a little less than a ranged basic attack, so enemies, namely ADCs, can still kill this turret at a safe distance, although they have to be very careful not to get into its range, which is similar to your first ability's range if you want to visualize it. Speaking of which, hitting enemies with your first ability will mark them, and Vulcan's turret will prioritize marked enemies and deal bonus damage to them. And this can work either way you combo it. 1 and then 2 is the most common way, but you can also just 2-1 and it will have the same effect. And man, this turret does a lot of damage if you're not careful. It's the ultimate noob trap, just slapping away for all of time on unsuspecting and unaware players, racking up insane damage numbers in the process. That is, if they don't play around it. If the enemy team is paying attention, when they try to kill you, this turret will be the first thing to go. They aren't getting turret shot for 800 damage if they know the first thing about Vulcan. This problem gets worse in certain matchups, most infamously gods like Naja and Zeus. This turret, like a tower bastion, gives Naja a free target to ring bounce off of and get more damage onto you as the Vulcan player. So while Vulcan's turret, and well, all of Vulcan to be honest, can feel like a constant mash fest of spamming whatever ability is currently up, you want to be a little more tactile against gods who can use the turret to their advantage. The same goes for situations where you can use it to your advantage. Unfortunately, most enemies can cut straight through the turret and onto Vulcan, but there are times when you can block projectiles too. Charon 1, Aposh 1, and even your regular basic attacks. Try to get crafty and block things with this turret whenever you can, but just like with your passive, remember that this feature doesn't make you unkillable, it's just a small part in the larger picture of trying not to die as Vulcan. Outside of that, just don't forget to use it on little things too, like while clearing out jungle camps and while doing objectives like Gold Fury and Fire Giant. You really want it pumping out the damage whenever you can. Another usage as well is using it to cover off jungle entrances and exits to prevent enemies from ganking you, or at the very least, make it much more obvious when they're about to. For instance, warding one jungle entrance and then putting your turret on the other, giving yourself full safety from that side of the map. Well, kinda, because Vulcan is still quite easy to kill, even with his passive and the damage his turret and first ability can bring. That's where his third ability comes in to really start giving his enemies some trouble. Vulcan throws a projectile at a respectable range, this projectile being able to be thrown over walls. It will damage and knock up any enemies hit. This is Vulcan's safest tool by a mile, and is the best way to poke but also get your combos started. 3, 1, walk back up in 2. Or 3, 2, 1 for maximum safety but less confirmed burst. Speaking of burst, sure, this combo isn't incredible early game, but wow, once Vulcan starts coming online, this combo does insane damage. But, say with me now, that's if it hits. Luckily, this is Vulcan's easiest ability to hit as well. What you need to be careful of is the follow-up afterwards. Sometimes all you can do for safety reasons is just 3-1, where standing there facing your enemies to lay down your 2 will give them just enough time to get back in range and start comboing you back. And let me just explain real quick why it may be unsafe to use your 2 or your 1 like this both in the same combo and in general. One thing I notice a lot of new players doing is not respecting or understanding the backpedal or strafe movement speed penalties. Basically, moving backwards or side to side or diagonally will slow your character down. Simple, right? Well, this means that Vulcan, a character who entirely needs to be looking at his enemies to fight them, makes it very easy to get into the trap of just staring at enemies while doing your combos and while looking for setups for them, which you do not want to do, especially given Vulcan's weak range. So while Vulcan's abilities are easy to hit, as are his entire combos frankly, you need to be very quick with your combos and make sure you're turning around after every combo to ensure maximum safety. Because remember, while you're staring at them being slowed down, they're moving at you at full speed. Don't forget about just using this ability alone too, especially considering all the potential dangers I just mentioned. Just lob it out and walk away. Simple. You also want to use it alone when using it for self-peel. Yeah, even though Vulcan has good damage as well as the movement speed on his passive, this is the only way of making people, actually stop hitting him. As I've been mentioning though, this ability is easily Vulcan's most flexible, so get crafty and try not to rely on staring at your opponents before using this ability to peel for yourself, as well as recognize when you can peel for yourself at a long distance before they even get in range to hit you. But if you want to talk about range, you gotta talk about Vulcan's ultimate. Vulcan fires a projectile which will land in a massive AoE, and he's able to aim it at exceptional range. The further you let the projectile go, the longer it will take to get there, but the more damage it will deal. And at maximum range, this ability becomes the hardest hitting burst damage ability in the entire game. But as you'd expect, you don't always get to use it this way, although you certainly want to try. Vulcan, compared to other mages, is clearly stubby, so that's part of what makes this ultimate so difficult to use at maximum distance, since, well, Vulcan doesn't operate anywhere close to that distance from his enemies. That said though, the potential damage here is so absurd that you actually want to play at the maximum range of this ability. Not in the early and mid game, obviously. During the early and mid game, you just want to use your core kit to harass and poke enemies out. Then, once they're nice and chunked, you go for this ultimate when they try to back. Bare minimum, this gives you more time of them not backing while you're clearing the wave. And at best, you kill them. But this ability is an obvious Aegis burner. Vulcan's damage is okay at best nowadays, but this ultimate more than fills that gap. But that means this huge, predictable ultimate is the main concern for enemies when it comes to what they want to use their Aegis relic on. There's really no avoiding this though, so don't get discouraged when it happens, since the ability has a lower than average cooldown, so if you burn an Aegis, you want to try and snag that opponent again with this ability once it's back up. One potential way around Aegis is using your third ability. So in this case, ultimate, then freedom as the ultimate is about to hit them, and since they're knocked up, they can no longer use Aegis. A potent combo for sure, but also brings up the idea of enemy movement abilities easily getting out of the AoE, particularly leaps which are able to immune the ultimate when timed correctly, which clearly is not hard to do since the ultimate clearly shows where and when it will hit. Again, just like with the relic Aegis, this is just a fact of life that people will use their movement abilities to get out of the ultimate. More advanced and risky plays, of course, will sometimes factor in enemy movement abilities like this, placing the ultimate instead ahead or behind their target, predicting where their movement ability will land. However, an easy yet still effective way around this is simply holding onto this ability as a finishing move, as I mentioned earlier. Vulcan's core kit is flawed, clearly, but it's still more than enough to force out enemy movement abilities from enemies if you're able to get your bread and butter combos out there. Then, simply place the center of the ultimate AoE on your target for the best chance of hitting them. Let's talk more about Vulcan in the late game though, when this ability is at its strongest. Like I mentioned earlier, the impact really is so massive that you want to play at or just below the maximum range of this ultimate. Of course, this almost writes off the rest of your kit, but just look at the numbers. At ranks 4 or especially 5, this ultimate literally does more damage than the rest of your abilities combined all in one go. So it's not only much safer than relying on your core kit, but also just as impactful as getting your hands dirty with your core kit if you're able to land the ability. This also leads to talking about it against things like objectives, which again, forget about your core kit. Wait until the objective gets to about a quarter or a fifth HP, sit at maximum distance, and then throw the ultimate out at the objective. It's extremely good at stealing objectives, but also simply getting enemies off of that objective and giving your teammates a chance to walk in. Also, consider that low cooldown on the ultimate too. This is an ability with an insane impact, but it's also something you can get cheeky with and just throw out at enemies to chunk them, giving your team a chance to do things like Gold Fury or walk in and take towers. Absolutely nobody wants to get hit with this ultimate. So, ultimate, have the enemy team scatter, and then you and your team walk into place to do what you want to do. Let's expand on that idea with some combos. 3, 2, 1. 3, 1, 2. 3, 1. Ult at a distance. 3, 2, 1. Ult close up. 3, 1, 2. For ability level, you want your 1 at level 1. This is for the low cooldown and the fact that it doesn't mess up your teammates' damage with a knockup on your 3. then your 3 at level 2, and your 2 at level 3. From there you max your 1, your 3, then your 2, leveling the ultimate whenever you can. However, you can kinda go any route here. Max your 1 for max damage and wave clear, max your 3 for safer poke but less wave clear, and level your 2 if you have no friends. See, they all have their uses. That kinda sounds like Vulcan in general, really. You have to have no friends to play as him. I'm only kidding, but he is really annoying to play against though. And that's partly because of what I originally wrote as the transition to the outro. Vulcan has a lot of uses and therefore has a lot of answers to whatever the enemy team throws at you, largely thanks to his 2 biggest features, low cooldown and that movement speed on his passive. The 2 of them working together in harmony to make Vulcan a constant onslaught of burst damage one after the other. So what's the hang up? Well, mostly it is just his range. It's great that you can spam out abilities like a well-oiled machine, but if you can't get in range to use his abilities before his enemies get in range for their abilities, what's he gonna do? That's why there's so much emphasis on his ultimate and prioritizing that, forgetting about your main abilities as the game goes later. You can't be safe and make an impact if you're just sitting in range for your 3, but especially if you're sitting there in range for your second or first ability, you really gotta kick back and start getting very good at reading when you want to use your ultimate, and then come swooping in with your core kit later if you really have to. This has always sort of been an issue, but it gets worse and worse for Vulcan as time goes on. I mean, before, you could easily pick around enemies with too much range. When Vulcan was first meta around seasons 1 and 2, I would say about half the mages could outrange him and the other half couldn't. But now it's like 8 out of 10 mid laners can stand outside of your range and still hit you, and you're just sat there eating their poke. Because remember, you can't activate your passive and get the combos going without hitting an enemy god, so if they're outside of your range, you can't get anything going. But still, you have to fight gods eventually, and eventually your combos start slapping, and eventually your ultimate becomes the undeniable nuke. But it just generally takes too long to get there, and man oh man, you have to work your butt off to just not die. So Vulcan, like Zeus, is a god where you really want a team based around him so that you can not only set up for his combos so he can get himself in range, but peel for him too. The absolute perfect god for all of that is coming next time. On that note, join me next time for my final god guide in SMITE on the legendarily boring Khepri. And thanks for watching.